The Amazon rainforest is often referred to as the world's lungs. This dense and magical tropical forest, which spans 9 countries in South America — Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, French Guiana, Guyana, Suriname, and Venezuela — has become a symbol of nature's powerful yet delicate balance. For decades, however, the forest has been suffering from severe deforestation, which threatens its existence and has the potential to harm ecosystems across the planet. Today's guest has been using high end technology to help tackle this issue. Rayane Pacheco, who is originally from the Amazonian state of Pará in Brazil, was part of the first cohort of the Fulbright Amazonia program, and her research touches on reforestation in private lands as well as on supporting compliance with the Brazilian Forest Code, amongst other things. Her work involves analyzing spatial data to understand patterns and relationships between illegal economic activities, such as land grabbing, gold mining, and logging, and historical factors, in order to better address the complex challenges affecting the forest today. I am Gabriele Jimenez, journalist and community manager of the Fulbrighter platform, the exclusive network connecting Fulbright alumni and grantees worldwide. If you're a current grantee or alumni, head to fulbrighternetwork.com to create your account. And if you're thinking about applying for Fulbright, keep listening. This episode might just convince you to do so. Hi, Hayani. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Hello, Gabriele. Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to become interested in environmental protection? So, I understand you come from a state in Brazil that is part of the Amazon. So, is that something that was a factor, you think? When did you first realize you wanted to study uh, themes related to the environment?
So, I grew up in the countryside. So, the nature and the agriculture area was something that was in my daily basis. And then I decided to go for my undergrad. And that time I did environmental management. But I was thinking, I want to do more, I want to apply techniques to analyze the situation of the forest, for example, and how could I help somehow the agriculture and also the production. So how could we go side by side? How can we produce but also protect the environment? So that's why I went for my master's, and at that time I did environmental modeling. During my master's, I could study the Brazilian Forest Code, which is the main law for the protection of native vegetation in Brazil. And then I could analyze the situation of the farms and see the situation in terms of legal reserve, in terms of buffer zones. With that, we could understand a little bit more. And then I brought this to research during my Fulbright scholarship. After my master's, I went to the PhD in the program of production engineering. And during that time, I was continuing doing my research on this area of environmental modeling.
So, from what you told me, I think growing up in the countryside, being surrounded by the forest, that kind of had an impact on you, which led you to pursue, this really long academic career and path where you've been really researching more and more when it comes to environmental protection. So, as I understand, you're currently pursuing a postdoc in the UK. Is this correct?
Yes, exactly. And this postdoc was a result of the Fulbright Amazonia because, I only got to know about the call because of a colleague that was part of the cohort. And he sent me the call, and then I could apply, and I was selected. And nowadays, I am doing this postdoc at the University of Bristol, and I am continuing studying the Amazon region.
That's amazing. So, how is working so far away from the land you're trying to protect? Do you miss being closer to the forest? Is it like a little bit of an awkward experience being so far away, or have you gotten used to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite different, and I miss my family, and also I miss the weather, especially. But it's really good. I'm working in an interdisciplinary team, so I'm learning from different disciplines, and we are putting together a really interesting research, trying to understand the different perspectives, bottom up and also top down. And by that, I mean I'm using remote sensing to see the situation of illicit economies such as land grabbing, illegal gold mining, and logging. But also my colleagues, they're working with the perspective of anthropology. So we are putting together different data sets to understand the reality and how we could approach and address this issue.
That sounds really interesting, especially when you're joining, different parts of your research together, such as the actual science and the sensors and everything, but also, anthropology. You mentioned the Fulbright Amazonia project and that it was through this program that you actually happened to hear about the postdoc you're on today. But I would love to hear a little bit more about your experience with the Fulbright Amazonia project. How did you first hear about that? When did you first become acquainted with this project?
I got to know about the Fulbright Amazonia program through a friend of mine. I met her during my master's, and she saw the call like in a WhatsApp group. And then she sent me, "Oh, this seems really interesting. You should apply." And then I got a shot, I applied and I was selected. I was so happy, I was the youngest in the team, with less experience. So it was amazing. It was my first experience in terms of being in a group with people from different countries. And then we had many exchanges and it was really amazing. So for me, was something that changed, my experience in terms of the professional development, but also personally. And then we had opportunities to meet in person, but also virtually. And then I could develop my perspective broadly, I also could go and do my first extend visit. So I went to the University of Texas, and then there I was working on my individual project, which was related to forest restoration. So I was analyzing scenarios to define best approaches to do restorations within the farms. So was really good. Besides the individual project, we had the collective project, and my team was the climate change team. And then in this team, we could analyze data sets related to climate events. And then we published a paper, and recently we got a prize. Yeah, that paper was awarded with a prize. So it was amazing. It was something that we were not expecting at all.
We can add the link to the paper to the description of the episode so that everybody can read afterwards. Congratulations on winning the award. You mentioned, you were the youngest early career participant in the program. How did collaborating with, more experienced researchers impact you and your career?
It was amazing. It changed the way I used to see things, because before I was working with people that had lots of experience, but we had like a different level in terms of was my advisor, and I was the student somehow. And in the Fulbright program was different. We were about the same. We were all colleagues and doing the work together. So it was amazing, and it changed the way I used to see things in this professional development. So one point was that, another one was amazing because we had different skills, and then we could mix all those skills and then elaborate like a collective work. So what was really good.
That sounds like a really powerful experience, and I think it probably helps with the self-esteem as well, right? When you are looking at people you admire, but you're also their colleague, I think it helps us feel a little bit more empowered. So I'm really glad that you had that experience. Um, so I'd like to dive into the actual topic that you've been researching for years, which, if it's the deforestation happening in the Amazon. Um, as I understand, this has been happening for many decades now. What do you think has changed over the years in terms of the new technology that we now have that helps us address this issue better, right? Because I imagine that, few decades ago, there was very little that you could do to actually determine what was happening on the ground. But now you have so much more technology. So, can you tell us a bit about the changes in the technology and how that supports the actual research and just ensuring that the forest is preserved.
Yeah. So controlling deforestation, it remains a major challenge nowadays, but we have created some technological tools and also some frameworks of public policies. And with all of that, we can understand, we can see better what's going on. For example, we have satellite-based deforestation monitoring systems, such as PRODS or and the TE. We also have environmental law regulating the private land use within the private properties, for example. And one of this law is called the Brazilian Forest Code. So it's basically the main law in Brazil regarding that. But we also have like land registries to see where is the deforestation happening and who is the responsible. So how could we address? And this registry is called the Rural Environmental Registry and was created with the Brazilian Forest Code. But beyond that, we also have some traceability and monitoring initiatives. We have, for example, the MITAC, which is like a commitment that the sectors use to follow because they were trying to control the deforestation in the supply chain. So all of those tools and public policies help us to control deforestation. So that's what happened like over the years in terms of addressing public policies, implementing those public policies, and then trying to find a way out of this deforestation to produce because we have a lot of areas that we could use. What we need is to improve, to restore the areas and to improve the capacity to produce in those areas that are already deforested.
So you mentioned the Brazilian forest code a couple of times. Can you very briefly explain to the people who are listening to us who may not know about this, what this is and what is its main goals? So I understand it's probably a bunch of laws, right? But you could maybe explain a little bit better than me what is the Brazilian forest code and what is its main goal.
Okay, so the Brazilian Forest Code stands out for its restrictive requirements. The law defines two main areas to be conserved within the farms. And the areas are called the legal reserve, which is a percentage of the farm, depending on the location of the farm, but also the type of vegetation, the size of the farm. So there are many criteria to define the percentage, but this percentage can vary from 80 to 20%. For example, in the legal Amazon, the legal reserve can be 80%, 50%, 35%, and 20%. So 80% it's for areas that have forest. And then 35% is a savanna area, 20% is another area. And the remaining area, it means the area out of the legal Amazon, it's 20%. So each farm has to maintain this percentage as legal reserve. But beyond this type of conservation, there is the buffer zones that are related to rivers, springs, hilltops, and so on. And this buffer zone depends on the size of the rivers. It can vary from, for example, from 5 to 500 meters. The conservation, the side area need to be conserved. So it means that if we apply the Brazilian Forest Code, we can have like many areas conserved, many native vegetation areas conserved, and then we could show like the world a successful case about producing and also conserving.
So basically, from what you're telling me, I understand that we in Brazil, there are enough laws, let's say, but the difficulty is enforcing those laws, right? In a huge forest like the Amazon forest. So that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, from your experience, what do you think is the main challenge in ensuring the protection of the Amazon forest nowadays? Why is it so difficult?
So we have law, we have systems, but it is still a challenge to implement. First, because there are still some issues related to the implementation. Mainly, the states need to analyze all the land registries because they have some issues, for example, overlaps. So it means that there are some things that needed to be fixed. And by the way, I'm working on trying to define some algorithms to analyze those land registries and somehow speed the process. So the first step is this. The second step is the actual implementation, let's say. For those that have deficit, it means that they don't have enough forest areas, so they need to restore or they need to compensate, so they need to take action. And this is a bit costly, let's say. But we also have like the way people think about, the nature, the environment. So many people, many farmers, they still think that to produce, we don't need nature, we don't need forest, but it's the opposite. We need forest to produce. And then they keep deforesting rather than restoring the areas, they spring zones. And even though there is a cutoff date in terms of deforestation, and it means that the restoration or the compensation depends on that date, which is nowadays 2008, according to the law. There are farmers that they still are deforesting. So it means that it's difficult to stop. So there are some discussions about bringing the economic mechanisms to the standing forest, but this is still something that is to be done because it's quite complicated. So we still have this challenge to manage.
And what do you think people that have never been to the Amazon should know about it?
The Amazon is incredible. And it's more than a huge biome. It's a place with culture, it's a place full of people. So it's a mix of nature and people, it's biodiversity. So we need to conserve the Amazon because this is an area that maintains the nature as it is, but unfortunately it has been changing. So people should know that the Amazon, it's much more than forest, more than biodiversity. It is a huge forest, of course, is a really beautiful biome, but it's also a place of culture. It's a place full of people. So it's not a simple relation. It's not only let's conserve everything. So we need to think about the people that live in that region.
So I think that's a great answer because I think often when people think about the Amazon, they think about this big forest and they forget that there's actually people living there, right? So when you talk about people being able to produce in the region as well, you're talking about the people that, also have to make a living there. So how do we balance, right, the need for people to produce and the need to protect? I think it's really important to remember that the Amazon is more than just a forest, but it's also a place where people are living and trying to make a life for themselves and their families. um, So that kind of makes me wonder, what can people who live outside of the Amazon do to support efforts to protect the forest? Like, let's say, you're in the UK or you're in the US or anywhere in the world. Is there something that people can do to support the forest?
I guess I would say not consuming products that came from illegal activities, for example, goat logging, but also the consumers, they have power, they can require products with a nature responsibility, so they have the power because if they say, I'm not gonna buy meat that comes from deforested area, so it would change. It at least could help, Of course, there is always a way to go around, but it's maybe a starting point.
Yes, I think that's really important as well to keep in mind that, when you go to the supermarket or whatever you go, it's important to do your research and know what you're consuming and how that affects, the lands that the products are coming from. So, I know that you are, full of projects and articles and researches, but you've mentioned earlier what you're doing currently, but I would like to know a little bit more about the research that you've been conducting lately. So, can you explain a little more in detail what you're trying to achieve right now with your postdoc research?
Yes. So my postdoc is focused on the land grabbing process specifically. So I am analyzing the public lands in the Amazon, specifically in the Brazilian Amazon region, and that have been grabbed by land grabbers in general. So I am analyzing this time series, and then I want to see what was the role that land grabbers had on defining the shape of undesignated public lands. The undesignated public lands are those state areas that the government didn't decide what is the use because we have public lands defined as conservation units, as indigenous lands, but we still have a lot of undesignated public lands. So I am working on that, and I want to develop a model that try to predict, like in 5 years, how could the undesignated public land be grabbed, like in 5, 10 years, So it's a scenario-based analysis. I'm going to look to the past, but also I want to try to see what could be like the future if everything goes as it is.
So, from what you're telling me, I understand that your work will be important for people who are designing the policies, right? So, it's also work that has an impact in public policies.
Yeah, that's what I'm expecting, and I would be very happy to contribute on that. And then we could somehow show what's going on, and maybe the government finally decides to assign a land use to that area, let's say a conservation unit, or define it as indigenous lands, for example, because this is what we have been seeing on the papers. So we need to designate the lands. If I'm able to elaborate scenarios and simulate like what could happen, let's say based on the history or based on a bunch of conditions, we could somehow show. So maybe it's better to define it now rather than expect for a future that it's not very happy.
And you mentioned the indigenous communities and the indigenous reservations. So, Brazil has a lot of indigenous reserves, and there's always discussions, within Congress and political parties about whether more reservations need to be designated. And I wonder, what is the role that indigenous communities play in protecting the forest? Do you see like an actual difference in lands that are designated as reservations and therefore, inhabited by indigenous populations?
Yes, there's no doubt. Many studies they have shown the roles of the indigenous lands and also the conservation units in terms of stop the deforestation, controlling the deforestation. Even though there are some areas with deforestation and illegal activities related to mining, illegal minings, but without these areas would be way harder,
And so I know that you have been, doing a lot of work lately and really trying to support the region that you come from, actually. And I was wondering, what is in your future? What are your future plans and goals? So you're now doing this postdoc in the UK. Do you have any path ahead of you, or you're just focusing on the present?
My goal is to find a way, or at least contribute on the ways on how to produce but also conserve. So this is my goal. And after the postdoc, I wanna continue to do research. I don't know exactly what, but I wanna keep doing that. And my research area is the Amazon. I'm from the Amazon, and I wanna continue to study the Amazon region.
That sounds like a really, really great way to contribute to the forest and to where you came from, to your place, right? I want to ask you about what advice you would have for people who are considering applying for a Fulbright award. So I do want to stress that there are several awards open, both for U.S. citizens as well as for foreigners who would like to go to the U.S. So, what piece of advice would you give for people who are considering applying for a Fulbright award?
I would say go for it. It's really good. I had an amazing experience. So apply and do something that you enjoy, because it's really nice when you do something that you like and you enjoy. And it's in a really good opportunity as the one that Fulbright gives us. So, yeah, do it.
Yeah, that's the advice we hear most often here on this podcast. Do it. So unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our interview. Ryan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for all the incredible work that you're doing to support the Amazon and the population. I want to wish you the very best with all of your research. It's really important, meaningful work. Thank you to all of our listeners. We will see you next time, and make sure to check out Ryane's latest research on the link in the description of this episode.